The Senior Bowl just happened, and this week we're going to talk a lot about the Senior Bowl. As you guys know, I'm a big fan of the Senior Bowl. I think it's one of the more important preseason kind of evaluation tools that we have because not only do you get to watch these guys practice, well, not only do you get to see them in the bowl game against competition, you get to watch these guys practice for 3 days. And somebody who is at those practices, I bring him on here to talk about the Falcons. He was also down at the Senior Bowl this week, watched all of the practices for both teams. Trey, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing good, Quincy. Thanks for bringing me along. Excited to be here to talk ball and talk about what we saw down in Mobile.
Yeah. So, what position groups? Because like each draft class has different strengths, and it varies from like what the junior class is doing. Even though now with NIL, the draft pool has gotten smaller. More guys are going back to college football, which I do think is actually better for the longevity of the game. But short term, it's going to shrink some draft pools. People are going to start panicking here. But what positions did you feel like from that Senior Bowl did you feel you walk out of going, hey, if you need a guy in this position group, you might be fine going later, versus it looks real thin in these groups.
Yeah, I really thought the O line and D line displayed a lot of depth. That was a group that I kind of had a lot of question marks because I feel like at the front of this class, there might not be as many big name edges or big name, interior guys beyond, the top 10 or 15 players in this draft. So I really wanted to see how that group looked. And, I thought, as somebody whose team is going to be looking heavily in the trenches, that there were a few guys that you could be pretty happy, walking away with in the later rounds, and maybe some guys that, people hadn't been as familiar with coming up.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So who are some of the guys that kind of caught your eye while you were down there?
Yeah, so from the O line group, I think this was a name everybody was hearing all week, and that was John Michael Schmitz, center out of Minnesota. He came in touted as probably the best O lineman, and he showed up from day one and proved that people were right to say so. He's for me when looking at his film, I was kind of worried about some of his power. Not an issue at all. He quickly dispelled any concerns I had about that. Got to see him get out on the screen game. Got to see him do a lot of lateral movement. Really good center. Somebody that you could be happy with your team taking. Cody Mauk. Now this is somebody that was really interested. He's out of North Dakota State.
Mm-hmm.
He's a tackle, but when you look at his film, you see, a lot of athleticism. You see a guard, and so when he got to the Senior Bowl, that's actually what they had him playing. Played guard all 3 days. He did take some snaps at center, and he looked comfortable at everything. So a guy that can play all positions on the line, has the speed and the athleticism to be a pulling guard, can also give you snaps at center if you need to. This is somebody that I think is going to rise up the boards. He's somebody that I really hope that the Falcons take a close look at. But I think any team would be really happy with him just based off that versatility alone.
Yeah.
And then, yeah,
So
go ahead.
with what's interesting is like what I think the Senior Bowl is really good for is myth busting, right? Because
Mm.
if you don't know a ton about anything other than like maybe the six schools that really matter in college football when it comes to who's going to win the championship, there are some perceptions that can happen with like, the Big 12 has its own perceptions. The Pac 12 has their own perceptions they have to go through. Then there's the group of five schools, and then there's the FCS schools like a Cody Mount comes from. Now, I went to Youngstown State. Unfortunately, we are cannon fodder for North Dakota State once a year at the very least, twice if we make the playoffs. I understand from watching those guys up close for 4 years, and I don't think we've ever beat them. Those dudes are big, they're strong, and they're just as powerful as like any FCS school at the starting level.
Yeah.
And usually those dudes, especially like the trenches guys from like North Dakota State, have no problem really elevating up. But if you're just looking at it from like the draft and you see North Dakota State, never seen them play, or maybe Louisiana Monroe or Tulsa or any of these schools that aren't huge names, you might think level of competition is an issue. Then you bring these guys to the Senior Bowl, and you're like, oh no. Nah, he's
Mm.
just built like that. He's different, right? I think one of those things for me that helped me with Perry on Winfrey when I was evaluating him last year was How do you do against Senior Bowl? Because I didn't know much about the Big 12, but I knew some of the
Right.
guys like Zion Williamson, Zion Johnson, who he was going up against in Senior Bowl practice. And I was like, okay, nah, he has length, he has strength, like he has all these things. The motor, when he's wrapped up, he's wrapped up. When he's not, he's not. And that's the problem with Perion. But those are things that can end up being fixable with him. And it's kind of the same thing you kind of mentioned with that guy. It just brought my mind up to him. But as you were saying,
Year 2 is Perion's year. I want to start off by saying that Quincy Winfrey's gonna do right by y'all.
I'm in too deep. I'm in too deep. But I know what I saw, man. I know what I saw. I know I saw the length, the strength, the pull. I know. Look, if he never turns out to be anything, I'm like, that Senior Bowl was like so amazing that he had last year. Like, it is. I don't know how somebody can have that great of a Senior Bowl just turn out to be nothing as a player. He won the MVP from defensive tackle.
I'm telling you, man. This is his.
It's gotta happen.
Don't even sweat
It's gotta happen. Jim Schwartz is gonna fix him. That's
right.
gotta
That's
happen.
That's right. Jim Schwartz is gonna fix that, man. And the last guy from the group, this is somebody whose name I wasn't really familiar with at all coming in, and that's Jalen Duncan out of Maryland. Left tackle. It's primarily what he was playing during the Senior Bowl. Like I said, was not familiar with this gentleman's game, and he made it a pretty quick impression on me on the first day. Absolutely stonewalled Keon White during one of the first reps of one-on-ones. Keon White is somebody else that I thought had one of the best Senior Bowls there. And Duncan showed consistently that he can hold it down on the left side without problem. He looks like a great pass pro left tackle. That's probably all he's going to really be able to play, though. I'll say that. He did look uncomfortable on the right side. I don't know if that just has to do with spacing. It's kind of different every time you ask an O-lineman really what affects them personally. But if you're looking for some depth and somebody that you can develop, he's somebody that I really like that could be taken in the later rounds, that I think could wind up and be a pretty serviceable tackle for an offense.
Yeah. Browns are in an interesting spot, too, because you look at the offensive line on the roster, and you're like, why would they want to draft more? They have Joe Bitonio, they have Wyatt Teller. But one of the things I've been trying to point out is, one, good teams like to use the draft as something for, hey, you might not need your year 1, but year 2 or 3, you're going to come into play, right? Especially along the line of scrimmage where it takes dudes a while. Like even Jordan Davis, who is the freakiest athlete I've ever seen at that position. He didn't just come out gangbusters day 1, you know what I mean? So it takes guys a little while. Like I think Aaron Donald's one of the few guys that like it didn't matter. He was that good. But there's one Aaron Donald. Like he might be the greatest defensive tackle of all time. Like he just might. But with trench guys, I'm thinking like, hey, you need to get 2 years down the line. The Browns have a lot of money wrapped up into the offensive line. They might need a tackle. They might need a center, or you might need a guard, to get cheaper so you can have money to put around Deshaun Watson and put it at wide receiver instead of having to put all your resources in the offensive line. So I think those offensive line prospects you mentioned are going to matter. Now, one of the things that a lot of people are focused on when it comes to Cleveland Browns, and you were a beneficiary of this week 4, I believe, when you saw the lack of depth that the Browns had at tackle and the problem that it caused for them, is defensive tackle, right? It's part of the reason why we brought Jim Schwartz in. He has had that history of fixing guys, Ndamukong Suh, Nick Fairley, you go down the list, you find strong defensive lines with him. He's going to be tasked with getting his hammer and tuning up this defensive line. Now, he gets one hell of a helper in the fact that, hey, you got Myles Garrett, right? You could do a lot worse than the defensive line with Myles Garrett, which is just a defensive line without Myles Garrett, right? But you got to figure out some of these things inside. Now, we kind of talked about Perion, them being able to put him in a position where he's asked to do the things that he's good at. They kind of did the same thing Oklahoma did, where they're like, hey, we're going to have you stack on double teams. And he just not good at that, right? What he's good at is just lining up, winning one-on-one. And when he wins one-on-one, he ends up being a better run defender because he's able to use that length to two gap things. But people get so enamored with the size and the length and the strength of him that they're like, oh yeah, he should be able to hold up double teams. I think he hates doing it personally.
I think he does.
To
be honest.
So he just kind of like stink. Like, you know how like when you are asked to do something you don't want to do, you just kind of stink at it. So people stop asking you to do it.
Right.
I feel like he's like, I'm not going to be stuck doing this. Like, like,
oh man,
that happens a lot with NFL players. Like Jadeveon Clowney was public about it, but like a lot of guys aren't public with it. But like Jadeveon was like, I can't go inside outside. I don't want to. Stop having me do that. You know what I mean? Like, they just don't, like, if they don't want to do it, they don't want to do it. So you can't make them do something they don't want to do. So you might as well just have them do what he wants to do. You know, some guys are fine with those roles, some guys aren't. I think Perrion's like, I know what I am.
he's like, I'm not doing that.
I'm like, nah, man, I am not Jeffrey Simmons, dog. You are not about to have me out here playing one tech. That's just not how this is gonna work. But moving on to like guys in this draft, who were there? I know there's some edge guys that are gonna catch some guys' eyes. Did you see any like 3 techs anywhere in this Senior Bowl class that you thought might be interesting?
Yeah, so I'll give you a name. And you know what? This is somebody because, you know, likewise in that Falcons Browns game, I think Nick Chubb had about 200 on the ground, almost 200 on the ground that game. We were looking a little soft into the interior as well. So Keanu Benton is somebody that I'm very intrigued by. So he's out of Wisconsin. He's about 6'4" and a half, 302 pounds. This is a very athletic nose. He is somebody that I actually can see playing, you know, from 0 to 3 tech. He can be that traditional nose guard for you. He can be that guy that holds up doubles. He offers a little bit extra in the pass rush game as well. He's got some upside there. I actually was able to find out while I was down there that he's working out with Chuck Smith. So I don't know if you're familiar with Chuck Smith's game, but he's a pass rush specialist. He's somebody that he handpicks who he works with. So he doesn't just take anybody's check. He looks through your film because he wants to be able to put his name and stamp it on you, you know, and he feels comfortable. And you could really see that whatever he had been doing in the short amount of time with Benton, it was already popping in practice. And he was a guy that I was excited about coming in and much more excited about leaving.
Yeah, I'm going to put a picture up of Keanu Benton for everybody at home. That is a big 300 pounds. Like, I don't know if he's only 300 pounds. That is a big 300 pounds.
I'll say his official measurements for the Senior Bowl was like 302. So I'm with you on that. I was like, I think his playing weight's a little more than that. But
and it's interesting too the way the NFL has evolved, because it used to be big and stout would stop the run. Like I think Grady Jarrett might be one of the last guys in that era where it's like he's just big and stout. Well, he's not, and he's more of a I'm big, but I'm like quicker than you think kind of guy.
Yeah, he definitely is.
Now what you see working is like, what is the run stuffer? And maybe this is because we're just getting better athletes at every position. It's these long and strong guys, like long and strong stops. Even if you're not the heaviest, like I think Montez Sweat is the biggest example of this in Washington, where you watch him and he is just tremendous against the run. And it's simply because he's long and strong, right? Like it's going more in the direction of you want more Calais Campbell on the inside, those long and strong guys, versus, you know, with a Big Daddy Sean Rogers. Remember him from back in the day where he was just big, you know what I mean? Like
he's the big man.
Yeah. Whereas like, okay, like you just need a big dude to hold it. Like Ted Washington, right? Had a whole career from just being big. But being big's not really what's going to work now. It's like, hey, you need to be long and strong. And maybe you're not going to be 350. But like Mount Cody is another one. But maybe you're not going to be 350. But at like 310, 320, which is like, I think that's what Benton plays at, because that's a big 300. Like, I know what 300 pounds looks like. That's a big man. Maybe he just carries it differently. Some guys can be like the same weight and they just carry it in different places so it just looks
Yeah.
heavier. He's a heavy 300. That is a heavy 300 right there. So that'd be somebody interesting to look at if you're the Browns going forward. I know a lot of people were interested in Byron Young from Alabama. What did you see much of him during Senior Bowl practice?
Yeah. I thought Young was somebody who's probably like a good example of like wasn't really high, but wasn't really low either. Pretty consistent throughout the week. Showed you most of what was on film. Um, he didn't look like a guy, but he definitely looked like he belonged. And I'll say I was probably expecting a little bit more from him, maybe hoping to see a little bit more of a flash, but didn't really get that out of him this week.
Interesting. All right, so who are some of those edge guys that popped off? I know there's one that everybody's been talking about. Is it the young man from Northwestern?
Oh yes. So the man and I I don't know how the attempt to take it this young man's name. It is he was a monster, and I believe he's more on the inside. I'm gonna do my best here to pronounce this, but
I'm gonna try to get the
while I work on
pronunciation
that,
guide for his from Northwestern's website. But every video I saw of him was just like him completely destroying another human being.
yeah.
And he is massive too, right?
He was quiet the first day. Day 2 and day 3, like totally different guy. I think he was just getting comfortable, getting ready, getting locked in, and then after that, he looked comfortable all week. He beat everybody. He beat John Michael Schmitz. He beat Mauk, who we mentioned earlier. Osiris, all of the big interior guys that were there. He got the best of them in at least one rep. So he was somebody that I thought definitely made a big name, big case for themselves coming out. Keon White. I think Keon White's probably more of a 5 tech, but I'm interested to see if he'll play edge in the league. But he was somebody who had a great week. I think he rose his stock potentially to maybe even sneak into the back end of the first, to be honest with you, depending on what a team sees and what they like in him. Very inexperienced football player. Was recruited to Old Dominion as a tight end, transferred, and then was playing last year. It was basically his first full season on the D line at Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech was like a nightmare last year. They fired their staff midseason and everything like that.
I went to those games. Yeah, they were a mess. They got a couple good players, but they're a little bit of a mess.
Yeah. So he was like, I taking in all of the circumstance and everything, he's somebody who's so much farther along than you would expect. And he's another guy that Chuck Smith is working with. And again, man, whatever he does with him in this short amount of time before they get to the Senior Bowl, him and Benton both, they just looked like they showed you a little bit more. I thought he was a little bit more bendy than I was expecting. I've seen the power show up on film, but he really showed more of the athleticism. And I think just getting with somebody like Chuck Smith, who can teach you how to do things with your body that, maybe a piece together Georgia Tech staff might not be able to do. It could do a lot for players like that who are still learning the game. Because again, like I said, this is his first full year on the line, and man, I think he really showed out at the Senior Bowl that he's somebody that should be looked at as like a real potential gem in this draft.
Yeah, one of the most fascinating changes in football has been a subtle one, but one, if you're paying attention, you've watched, is it used to be guys would come out and they're specific on the defensive line, right? This is a nose and a 3-4. This is a 3-4 outside linebacker. That's gone away. Like, you don't really hear the same conversations of can he transition to a 3-4, 4-3 anymore, because the defensive line positions have kind of gone positionless, like basketball, to where some guys go, like Aaron Donald is technically a D tackle. He's a 3-tech.
Yeah.
But he plays everywhere. You know what I mean? He's wherever he is needed, right? Chris Jones, another great example. We saw this against Cincinnati where he could go inside, outside. It's like whack-a-mole. Where is Chris Jones, right? And now you're getting these different looks from guys where it used to be strict, like, hey, you're a left side pass rusher, you're a right side pass rusher. And it's done that, I think, all throughout the league almost, where that's where if your best pass rusher doesn't go on one side, he moves around. I think Pittsburgh's one of a few places that are still so old school where you only see TJ Watt on the right side. But most places they're like, okay, we're gonna figure out a way to put Miles in, out, left, right, maybe 4-eye, 4E, power end sometimes, or you're gonna have a off balance alignment where he's super wide, and then you have somebody playing a power end, which is at like almost a 3-tech alignment. So these things have kind of changed around with how they're being used, and it makes it so like there's not like, hey, this guy's big enough to do this. It's like, well, is he long enough? Is he quick enough to get away?
You're looking for the traits now. You're not trying to put a guy in a box.
Yeah, because it's like you can move a guy around and adjust around that. And it's a fascinating evolution that's happening. I think the 49ers really put this one in place where they had that crazy defensive line together with like a Bosa brother. They had both DeForest Buckner and Solomon Thomas, I think, on the inside. And then they had, who did they have on that other edge? I feel like, was it?
I don't remember. I just remember before that it was Justin Smith and then Alden. And then, like you said, they've really always committed to kind of being able to use their guys all over the line.
Yeah, and then you look at even Philadelphia, they have guys who are interchangeable amongst that, that they can move in and out. Man. Yeah, it's just, that's where it's going. Like if you have, and you look at the great teams in football this year, Georgia and Philadelphia, who, by the way, Philly has not played a close playoff game yet. I feel like I don't know what's going to happen in Super Bowl because Philly might be the greatest team I've seen in quite a while.
And we just don't realize it yet, or we're not giving them the respect yet. They
got like 2 of everything over there. But then it's the other side is Pat Mahomes, and I can't be like, oh, well, Pat has no chance because I've seen him come out here and almost win a game with nobody. So it's going to be a fascinating Super Bowl. But I think it's also fascinating how that change has happened. And the teams that can be unpredictable in their fronts and cause chaos by just moving guys around and having depth at the defensive line, those tend to be your best football teams. NFC Championship game. You look at that defensive line for the 49ers, and then you look at that defensive line for the Eagles, 2 very good units. You look at AFC Championship game. What was the story in that game, right? It was Chris Jones dominating along the defensive line against a Bengals team that's really good at the defensive line as well, right? DJ Reader, BJ Hill, Trey Henderson, Sam Hubbard. They've spent a lot of effort there. And that's what separates, I think, that's one of the things we're seeing, right? As much as we want to focus on making the game lighter and more athletic, we're realizing that there's a limit to what defense can be played in the back end. You can have a great secondary. Jalen Ramsey is great. Has it mattered? Like, when's the last time having Jalen Ramsey has really mattered like that, right? But where it does matter is on that front line where it's like, hey, you can disrupt the game because the best way to stop a pass is going to be an old school saying. The best way to stop a pass is to get a sack or to tip it at the line of scrimmage. That's a lot easier than covering these guys in the back end. And I think it's just interesting that that's the way the league is going. I don't think, and it's interesting to see which teams are catching up with that, which teams aren't. The Browns weren't at that, right? They were trying to build at the back end, and it was getting them killed because if you don't have a strong front end, you're just not going to hold up against these teams. Matter. And you just, again, you look around at the best teams in the NFL, there's not a weak defensive line there. There's not a weak one there. That's not a coincidence, right? And it's been like that for 2 years. Who won the Super Bowl last year? LA Rams. They had like a great defensive line last year. So this is
like
just,
you said, how did they stop the pass at the end of the game?
Yeah. Aaron Donald.
Ramsey was beat, but Aaron Donald stopped the play. So it was like right there, case in point, man. I mean,
sack is undefeated, right? You know what I mean? Nobody has ever thrown a touchdown and gotten a sack in the same play. It just is not possible. No. So I think that's the direction that teams need to move in. And we're just seeing crops of guys come in that if they like came into the league 10 years ago, we'd be like, wow. Like that class from last year. The fact that Perion Winfrey was like buried in it is like he ran like a sub 540, had like a great 10-yard split, and it didn't matter because Jordan Davis had one of the most ridiculous combine outings of all time. But there were like multiple guys who had ridiculous combine outings. The defensive line guys, they are getting so athletic so fast that like you can get a guy in the second or third round. It's a freak, a legitimate freak. And it just happens because
I wanted Travis Jones so badly last year. There's another
Travis
guy
Jones.
where I'm like, I can't believe he's falling right now. He's just ridiculous. But
yeah, I think that's going to be the point of emphasis for a lot of teams. You look at it and you're like, okay, this is where you have to get it. Browns need somebody like Perrion to work out, right? You know, we need options on that defensive line. Get guys who are long and strong. That's how you stop the run. That's how you disrupt passing. That's how you disrupt timing. That's how you win football games in NFL. All these things change, huh, Trey?
Can't wait to
all
see
these
that
things change. Everything changes, but at the end of the day, it always comes back to the line of scrimmage. As much as they want us to make it about as much as they want football to be 7-on-7, it will never matter as much as the 5-on-5 that happens in that front seven between both teams. That is a fascinating fact about football. When you go throughout any era, there's not a single era where you could walk out with a mediocre offensive line, be like, all right, we good. You know what I mean? Like it never has happened. Yeah. It's the law of football. That's why I'm so serious about the defensive line. Why I preach about it almost every year is because that is the one group that can't go wrong. Those two, that'll ruin the season not having a group that's good there. So hopefully the Browns learned a lesson. Maybe even the Falcons have learned a lesson.
Oh boy, we'll see. We'll see. One miracle at a time.
And we all make smart choices down the line here. But that's it for this. I want to thank Trey for coming on, talking about the Senior Bowl. Trey, where can they find you?
Y'all can find me on Twitter at TRE3SHON, Trayshawn, and at the New Millennium Falcons podcast at NM Falcons. Really appreciate you bringing me on here, Quincy. It's a blast. Always love talking ball.
No problem, man. Always a blast having you on. I want to thank everybody else for watching. Everybody have a great day. Have an even better night.